Europe in the mid-14th century, a time of bustling cities and vibrant trade. Few could have imagined the darkness about to descend, the Black Death. This epidemic would reshape the social, economic, and political landscapes of Europe. Rumors from the east spoke of a terrible sickness consuming cities. Ships arrived with crews decimated, bodies covered in dark boils. The Black Death had arrived, carried by fleas on rats, finding fertile ground in medieval cities. The plague spread rapidly through trade, travel, and close-knit communities. Death tolls mounted, overwhelming burial grounds and leaving streets littered with corpses. The social order began to crumble under the weight of the pandemic. The Black Death originated in the arid steppes of Central Asia. The bacterium Yersinia pestis thrived in fleas on rodents like marmots. The plague spread via the Silk Road, carried by traders to Europe. The Black Death spread via fleas in the crowded conditions of the Silk Road. Victims experienced high fevers, chills, and swollen lymph nodes, often dying within days. The plague left a trail of devastation, turning cities into ghost towns. The Silk Road became an unwitting accomplice in the plague's spread. The Mongol Empire's vast network facilitated the movement of infected fleas and rats. The plague reached the Crimean Peninsula, marking its entry into Europe. The Genoese colony of Caffa became the first point of contact for the Black Death in Europe. Plague-ridden ships from the east arrived, bringing infected rats and fleas. Fleeing Caffa, Genoese ships carried the Black Death to new lands. (1347). The Black Death reaches mainland Europe. The first major outbreak struck Messina, Sicily, spreading rapidly. From Messina, the Black Death fanned out, reaching the Italian mainland. By spring 1348, the Black Death had engulfed much of Italy. Crossing the Alps, it reached France, finding a population weakened by famine and war. Paris became a focal point, with hospitals overflowing and the stench of death permeating the air. 1348 to 1350 marked the peak of the Black Death's devastation. The plague spread from the Iberian Peninsula to the Balkan Peninsula, leaving a toll of death and despair. Fear and suspicion reigned, with people avoiding contact and seeking solace in religious fervor. Beyond 1350, the plague's shadow continued to loom large. Recurring outbreaks claimed countless lives and disrupted societies. The Black Death reshaped the demographic landscape and left an indelible mark on Europe. The Black Death's impact on Europe was apocalyptic. Historians estimate that between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's population perished. The plague's death toll was a human tragedy of unimaginable proportions, leaving a gaping hole in the social fabric of Europe. Across Europe, cities and countrysides are decimated. The Black Death's impact was felt far and wide, reaching every corner of Europe with terrifying impartiality. Cities, with their dense populations and poor sanitation, were hit particularly hard. The plague spread like wildfire through these urban centers, leaving behind a trail of death and despair. Paris, London, Florence, Venice, these once thriving cities became shadows of their former selves. Streets that had once bustled with merchants, artisans, and citizens going about their daily lives were now eerily quiet, save for the cries of the sick and the mournful tolling of church bells. The stench of death permeated the air, a grim reminder of the invisible enemy stalking the land. But the plague didn't confine itself to cities. It also ravaged the countryside, spreading along trade routes and through rural communities. Villages that had seemed like havens from the disease soon found themselves in its grip. Farmers and peasants, the backbone of the medieval economy, succumbed to the plague, leaving fields untended and harvests to rot. The Black Death's impact on the countryside was especially devastating because it disrupted the food supply. With fewer people to work the land, harvests dwindled, and famine became a constant threat. The plague, already a biological disaster, was creating an economic and social crisis of unprecedented proportions. Unfathomable loss, social and psychological impact. The sheer number of deaths during the Black Death had a profound impact on the social and psychological fabric of Europe. The loss of so many lives, often in a short span of time, created a sense of collective trauma that echoed for generations. Families were torn apart, with parents burying their children and children left orphaned. The bonds of community, once strong in the face of hardship, were strained to the breaking point by fear and suspicion. People avoided contact with one another, terrified of contracting the disease. Trust eroded as neighbors turned on neighbors, accusing each other of spreading the plague. The Black Death also had a profound impact on religious beliefs and practices. Some saw the plague as divine punishment for humanity's sins, leading to a surge in religious fervor and penance. Others questioned their faith, struggling to reconcile the existence of a loving God with the suffering they witnessed. The psychological scars of the Black Death ran deep. The world, once familiar and predictable, had been turned upside down. The plague had shaken people's faith in God, their trust in their fellow human beings, and their belief in the stability of the social order. Amidst the ruins, seeds of change take root. The Black Death, for all its horrors, also sowed the seeds of significant change in Europe. The massive loss of life led to labor shortages, which in turn gave peasants and laborers more bargaining power. They could demand higher wages and better working conditions, something unthinkable before the plague. The plague also challenged the authority of the Catholic Church. The Church's inability to explain or prevent the plague, coupled with the deaths of many priests and nuns, led some to question its teachings and seek alternative explanations for the disaster. This questioning of authority, both religious and secular, would have profound implications for the future of Europe. Furthermore, the Black Death spurred innovations in medicine and public health. While medieval remedies proved largely ineffective against the plague, the experience forced physicians to re-examine their assumptions and seek new ways to understand and combat disease. The Black Death was a cataclysmic event, but it wasn't the end of the story for Europe. From the ashes of this devastating pandemic, a new world began to emerge, one shaped by the lessons learned and the changes wrought by this unprecedented crisis. Labor shortages, the balance of power shifts. The Black Death in its wake left a landscape drastically altered. One of the most immediate and profound consequences was a severe labor shortage. With a third to half of the population gone, those who survived found themselves in high demand. The traditional order of lords and peasants, so entrenched in medieval society, began to crumble. Before the plague, peasants were tied to the land, bound to serve their feudal lords. Their lives were ones of hard labor and limited opportunity. The Black Death, however, upended this system. With fewer workers available, peasants found themselves with leverage they had never possessed before. Landowners, desperate to keep their fields tilled and their harvests coming, were forced to offer higher wages and better conditions to attract and keep laborers. Peasants who had once been tied to a single estate now had the freedom to move, seeking the best opportunities for themselves and their families. This shift in the balance of power had a profound impact on the social and economic landscape of Europe. The old feudal order, already weakened by economic changes and social unrest, began to crumble. A new era, one marked by greater social mobility and economic opportunity for some, was dawning. The end of feudalism cracks in the foundation. The Black Death's impact on feudalism was seismic. Feudalism relied on a rigid hierarchy, with peasants tied to the land. The plague disrupted this balance by decimating the labor force. Lords found it difficult to maintain their estates and power, Many lords tried to enforce old laws on a resistant population. Peasant revolts became common, demanding better treatment. The Jacquerie and the Peasants' Revolt highlighted deep societal fissures. The Black Death hastened the decline of feudalism, paving the way for a new era. Rise of urban centers, opportunities in the aftermath. The Black Death, while devastating for Europe's population, had a curious effect on its urban centers. While cities had initially been hit hard by the plague, they recovered faster than rural areas. This was partly due to the influx of people from the countryside, seeking better opportunities and escaping the remnants of the feudal system. With fewer people to work the land, many peasants saw cities as places where they could earn higher wages and have more control over their lives. This led to a surge in urbanization, with cities expanding and new towns springing up to accommodate the growing population. The rise of urban centers also fueled the growth of trade and commerce. With more people concentrated in cities, there was a greater demand for goods and services. Guilds, which had existed in medieval Europe for centuries, gained even more prominence, controlling the production and distribution of goods and setting standards for quality and craftsmanship. The Black Death, in a strange twist of fate, had inadvertently contributed to the decline of the old feudal order and the rise of a new, more urbanized and commercialized society. Cities, once seen as centers of disease and danger, were now becoming engines of economic growth and social change. Adapting to a new reality. The Black Death forced Europe to confront its economic vulnerabilities and adapt to a new reality. With labor scarce and traditional systems disrupted, innovation became essential for survival. Necessity, as they say, is the mother of invention, and the post-plague era was no exception. One of the most significant changes was the shift from a primarily agrarian economy to one that embraced trade and commerce. With fewer people to work the land, Europeans looked to other sources of income, such as manufacturing, shipbuilding, and international trade. This led to the expansion of existing trade routes and the development of new ones, connecting Europe to the rest of the world. The Black Death also spurred technological advancements, particularly in agriculture. With fewer hands to work the fields, landowners sought ways to increase efficiency. This led to the adoption of new farming techniques, such as the three-field crop rotation system, which helped to improve yields and reduce the risk of crop failure. The Black Death, though a period of immense suffering, forced Europe to rethink its economic practices. This period of upheaval and adaptation laid the groundwork for the economic and technological innovations that would characterize the Renaissance and beyond. Before the Black Death, the Catholic Church stood as the unchallenged authority in Europe. The plague shook this foundation to its core. The Church's inability to explain or prevent the catastrophe left many questioning its teachings. Some saw the Black Death as divine punishment, a sign of God's wrath. Others found it difficult to reconcile the horrors with the idea of a benevolent God. The plague led to a crisis of faith for many. This questioning opened the door to new ideas and ways of thinking. The Black Death, while a tragedy of immense proportions, also acted as a catalyst for social mobility, particularly among the peasantry. With labor in high demand, those who survived the plague found themselves with newfound bargaining power. They were no longer bound to the land by feudal obligations and could demand better wages and working conditions. This newfound freedom, however, was not without its challenges. The ruling classes, accustomed to a life of privilege and control, often resisted these changes, leading to social tensions and unrest. The Peasants' Revolt in England in 1381, for example, was sparked in part by attempts to reimpose pre-plague labor restrictions and taxes. The Black Death, in essence, upset the established social order. It created opportunities for some, anxieties for others, and a period of profound adjustment for all. The rigid hierarchies of the medieval world were becoming more fluid, with new possibilities emerging for those who dared to seize them. This period of social change wasn't a smooth transition. It was marked by conflicts, power struggles, and a search for a new equilibrium. But it also laid the groundwork for a more dynamic and less rigid society, one where individual merit and effort could, in some cases, outweigh birthright and social standing. The rise of the state's centralization of power. The Black Death weakened the feudal system but strengthened monarchs and centralized states. Rulers found new ways to manage realms, collect taxes, and maintain order. Power shifted from local lords to monarchs and state institutions. Monarchs imposed quarantines, regulated trade, and provided relief. They centralized power, creating bureaucracies, armies, and taxation systems. The Black Death inadvertently strengthened monarchs, paving the way for modern nation-states. A new worldview, from despair to humanism. The Black Death, despite its horrors, also had a profound impact on European thought and culture. The plague's devastation forced people to confront their own mortality, question traditional beliefs, and find new ways to make sense of the world around them. This period of introspection and upheaval gave rise to a new intellectual and artistic movement, Renaissance humanism. Humanism, as its name suggests, placed a greater emphasis on human reason, experience, and creativity. It encouraged the study of classical literature, philosophy, and art, and sought to apply these ancient wisdoms to contemporary challenges. Humanists believed in the potential of human beings to shape their own destiny, to learn from the past, and to create a better future. This new worldview was a departure from the more God-centered perspective of the medieval period. The Black Death, by shaking people's faith in divine providence, had inadvertently created space for a more human-centered understanding of the world. The Renaissance, with its emphasis on art, science, and human potential, was in many ways a response to the trauma of the Black Death. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of creativity, and the enduring belief in the possibility of progress, even in the face of unimaginable suffering. The enduring significance of the Black Death. The Black Death, a cataclysmic event that swept across Europe in the mid-14th century, left an indelible mark on human history. Its impact extended far beyond the immediate devastation, shaping the course of social, economic, political, and even artistic and intellectual life for centuries to come. While the plague itself eventually subsided, its echoes can still be felt today. The fear of pandemic disease, the questioning of authority, the search for meaning in the face of suffering. These themes resonate throughout history, reminding us of the fragility of life and the enduring power of the human spirit. The Black Death, in many ways, marked the end of an era. It shattered the old feudal order, challenged the authority of the church, and paved the way for new social structures, economic systems, and ways of thinking. The world that emerged from the plague's shadow was different, forever altered by the experience. It's difficult to imagine the terror and despair that gripped Europe during those dark years. Yet, amidst the death and suffering, there were also stories of resilience, compassion, and the enduring human capacity for hope. The Black Death, for all its horrors, reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable adversity, humanity endures, adapts, and ultimately finds a way forward. Lessons from history, understanding our present, shaping our future. The Black Death holds valuable lessons for us today. It reminds us of our interconnected world and the need for public health preparedness. The plague's spread shows that disease knows no borders. Understanding history offers insights into the human condition. Studying the past helps us prepare for future challenges. The Black Death teaches resilience, innovation, and the capacity for change. Like and subscribe to Untold Past for more history insights.